concerned about, and what is a distraction? What should we be focused on as issues for the human race in the next few years? And what just is something that is a misdirect, like the magician on the stage, that we shouldn't even be worried about, but they're trying to get us to think that way? How can you separate these things out for people? This is a really important opportunity to make a statement.
Alfred probably is best qualified to answer that.
Well, as a general answer to that, I would say that anything associated with the permanent war economy, which is an economy based on the manipulation of the dialectic of enemies, is a fundamental distraction, so that the entirety of the arms race, the entirety of the strategic balance of forces using threat of war is a distraction.
So don't fall for the war rhetoric.
Right.
Right.
And number two, the area that these gentlemen have worked in, I think, is the cutting edge of human consciousness moving to the next level. And that is...
I think it's you're working in the area of human consciousness, but...
Well, no, but understanding that an extraterrestrial presence is just not an abstraction, but rather it's a human race very much like our own.
It's an extension of our family.
Yeah, that lives under the surface of Mars, with whom our secret government now has contact. And so we have rights, we have inherent rights, in the same way I think under natural law, which will invoke that, which was, they were expressed in the Declaration of Independence of the U.S., they were expressed in the U.S. Constitution, the Canadian Charter of Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, various documents in our terrestrial human culture, and those include rights as sovereign citizens in the universe. Therefore, if our governments are now engaged in long-term, I mean, these things go back at least 20 or 30 years, and that's just from people who I've talked to.
Treaties.
Yeah, I have to remind you that when we the governments, it's not the president or down, or the queen and down. It's agencies
above that.
Yes.
So you can't blame the governments that we normally call governments.
No, sure. But whether or not they are supra-governments, they are still subject to natural law and universal law. And they can be hauled before a court, empowered under natural law to stand trial for war crimes. But we don't want to go that direction. The direction that we want to go is to have that secret world become transparent and integrate with our world, for which we have an inherent right under natural law.
Bob, you had your hand raised. You wanted to say something.
I simply must apologize that I had an appointment I accepted for an interview in about 5 minutes. And I do want to say I'm sorry, but I will have to take leave of you illustrious personalities here for a while. You know, I have to go. I'm sorry, Carrie.
Okay, it's okay. Is there anything you want to say before you leave, Bob, about, you know, the end of secrecy and the beginning of what's coming next? Because just as I went to get you today, you were addressing a group and you said there's going to be in the next 12 to 18 months some things that people need to prepare for.
Well, the gentleman I was talking to is an economist and a bit of a banker. And he's been looking at the statistics, the data, and he's been watching what's been going on the world markets. And he's troubled by what he sees. And he's convinced that we're not out of the woods yet on this economic thing. And he asked me, what did I honestly think the next year or so have coming. And I said, as I said yesterday, we're in for some bad times. We have not seen the worst of it yet. And I hate to tell you that, but that's true. We have not seen the worst. The other shoe has not dropped yet. And the only thing I can tell you is that in the next year and a half, we're in for some events on a world scale that is going to make 9/11 pale in comparison, and that is sad and tragic. But to leave you with this, I must leave you on an up note for the viewers who will be seeing this. And as Tolstoy said, there is that spark that burns deep within each of us. It will not go out no matter how dark the world becomes. And I want to leave this with the people who will see this tape. There is a tomorrow. The future of this species is glorious. It is in the stars. And they've got to have hope and not be afraid. And that's all I can say in closing.
Okay. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, sweetheart.
It's an honor as always.
Thanks so much, Bob.
It's always a pleasure. Read this gentleman's book.
Absolutely, yes. Well, I've read his work, actually. I read
Warrior,
his work a long
Yes.
time ago. Before the organization of exopolitics was ever created, this man had the vision
Oh,
of something
he's
much
a true
greater.
visionary. He's a
Oh
true
yeah,
visionary.
absolutely. I don't think people even realize that this man is a true futurist, actually.
Well, if someone would be kind
And he
enough,
should be listened to in that way, because what he says today is not often not understood. But I think it's always the kind of thing that years in advance, years later, they're going to say, he was one of the first, if not the first, in certain areas. It's a gift. It's your
we need our prophets and we need our visionaries. And
That's right.
here sits one.
I just feel that we need to realize that the rest of our family has been here visiting us, and also slightly off the planet and other places, and they're interested in watching, and they would not have survived as long as they hadn't gone through this transition that we're about to go through. And so you have to realize that they're friendly and not evil, mean creatures out there like in some science fiction movies.
All of them?
Anyone that survived, generally, anyone that survived that's worthwhile, I mean, the majority, otherwise they would have destroyed themselves by now.
But you're not saying that 100% of the extraterrestrial races are friendly?
They have a different way of...
I'm trying to scare anyone.
some are service to self, some are service to others.
I'm just interested in-
Service to self actually means that what you're, what they're, because you haven't actually met them all, right?
No, that's impossible.
You were only exposed to a few.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about particular groups, but the thing is that in general, there was this type 0 that was talked about in type 1. They wouldn't have survived this type 0 to type 1 transition if they hadn't raised their consciousness to some degree. In general, that's the case. There may have been some exceptions, but they're such a minority that they
well, actually, our government their liaison is often with the service to self.
Yeah, that's right.
And the evil forces on this planet aren't doing it all on their own. They didn't think up all this stuff on their own.
Well,
They've got
actually,
their own.
humanity isn't doing it all on their own. They're
got their own laws
being
and
pushed and prodded by some unseen forces and unseen beings. It may be a philosophical difference, or
it's a philosophical difference. That's what it is. Yeah.
yeah.
And
I
that's-
mean, by recognizing their existence, I'm not giving them power. I'm just saying we've got to tell the truth here. There is evil out there in the universe.
Well-
It's not just, it doesn't just stop at the Illuminati.
There's darkness, but darkness is, for me, I view it as ignorance, or
Ultimately,
it's
of course, that's right.
absence of light. It's not an opposing force. Ultimately, there's light, and then there's no light,
I'm just
or
talking-
interference.
I'm just talking about functionality.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we can, I think actually even you could talk about, Alfred, what we've been talking about off camera a little bit in terms of there is investigation at the moment going into some of the relationships that are going on behind the scenes with various races. And
Yes,
you know what I
and
mean?
sure. I mean, just to keep it down to specific data points, we know what Arthur has said here, that he's been to Mars. We also have another very credible whistleblower who we've talked about, who in 1980 went to Mars twice.
This is Andrew Bajaga.
Yes,
Yep.
in the company of a CIA officer, Courtney Hunt, just to put that on the record, from through a Mars jump room, a teleportation jump room, from El Segundo, California, to one of the sort of bunker type bases right under the surface of Mars, and who walked around on the surface of Mars, and who in 1971, in the company of his father, who was a CIA contract officer type, met 3 Martian astronauts who were on a liaison and coordination visit at Curtiss Wright Air Force Base. And so we know that from at least 1971, there's been a coordinating and liaison type function or relationship between the Martians and the U.S. government. Well, from what I've read,